Hello, everyone. This is a fictional story that I want to tell you. So go ahead and listen. Hashtag protected by a stranger. Hashtag chapter 1. An unexpected encounter. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn as Eliza Mercer hurried down Maple Street, her footsteps echoing against the brick buildings that line the quiet neighborhood. At 26, she had grown accustomed to walking home alone after her late shifts at the community library. Tonight, however, something felt different. The familiar route seemed somehow altered, as if the shadows had shifted ever so slightly from their usual places. Eliza pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, quickening her pace. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting intermittent pools of amber light on the sidewalk. She was only 3 blocks from her apartment now. 3 blocks, 5 minutes, and she'd be home. The sound came first, footsteps, too heavy and deliberate to be casual, too rhythmic to be coincidental. Eliza didn't turn around. Instead, she clutched her bag closer to her side and walked faster, her heart beginning to pound against her ribcage. The footsteps accelerated too, matching her pace with unsettling precision. "Don't panic," she told herself. "You're almost home." But home suddenly seemed impossibly far away. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Eliza fumbled for her phone, fingers trembling as she tried to unlock the screen. Before she could dial, a hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around with such force that she nearly lost her balance. "Hand over the bag," a harsh voice demanded. The man's face was obscured by the shadow of a hood, but Eliza could make out the glint of something metallic in his right hand. "Please," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have anything valuable," I said. "Hand it over." The man's grip tightened painfully on her arm, and Eliza felt the cold press of what she now recognized as a knife against her side. Time seemed to slow. Eliza's mind raced through her limited options. Her self-defense class had taught her to comply in situations involving weapons, but instinct told her that surrendering her bag wouldn't be the end of this encounter. Just as she was about to relinquish her bag, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Let her go." The command was simple, direct, and delivered with such authority that both Eliza and her attacker froze. A tall figure emerged from the shadows of an adjacent alley, moving with purpose toward them. The attacker hesitated, his grip on Eliza slackening slightly. "Stay out of this, man. This isn't your business." "I'm making it my business," the stranger replied, stepping into the light of a nearby street lamp. Eliza caught her first glimpse of her unexpected defender. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cut short and features that seemed carved from stone. But it was his eyes that captured her attention, intense, focused, and utterly unafraid. The attacker made a sudden move, shoving Eliza aside as he lunged toward the stranger with his knife. She stumbled backward, hitting the ground hard as a brief, violent struggle ensued. There was a grunt of pain, the sound of something clattering on the pavement, and then silence. When Eliza looked up, her attacker was sprawled on the ground, the knife several feet away. The stranger stood over him, breathing heavily. "Are you okay?" he asked, turning to Eliza and extending a hand. She nodded, unable to find her voice as she allowed him to help her to her feet. Up close, she could see that he was perhaps in his early 30s, with a small scar above his right eyebrow and eyes that were a startling shade of green. "I'm fine," she managed after a moment. "Thank you." The man who had attacked her was beginning to stir. Without taking his eyes off him, the stranger pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You should sit down. You're shaking." Eliza hadn't noticed until he mentioned it, but her entire body was indeed trembling. She sank down onto a nearby bench, watching as the stranger efficiently reported the incident, his voice calm and measured. Minutes later, the wail of sirens filled the air. The attacker had regained consciousness, but made no attempt to flee, seeming to understand that the stranger, who stood watch with a quiet intensity, would prevent any escape. As 2 police officers approached, the stranger turned to Eliza. "They'll need your statement. Will you be okay talking to them?" She nodded, finding her voice again. "Yes. Thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along. Something flickered across his face, a brief, unreadable expression. I'm glad I was here, he said simply. The police separated them for questioning, and Eliza found herself glancing over repeatedly at the stranger as she recounted her experience. He spoke to the officers with the same calm authority he had displayed earlier, his posture relaxed but alert. After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 30 minutes, the police led her attacker away in handcuffs. One of the officers approached Eliza with a kind smile. You were lucky tonight, miss. Not many people would step in like that these days. Eliza nodded, her gaze drifting to where the stranger stood talking to another officer. Yes, I was. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement, but you're free to go home now. Would you like an escort? Before she could answer, the stranger approached. I can walk her home, he offered, then quickly added, if that's all right with you, of course. Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. That would be nice, thank you. The officer seemed satisfied with this arrangement and, after a few more questions, left them alone. An awkward silence fell between them as they began walking in the direction of Eliza's apartment. She realized with a start that she was about to lead a complete stranger to her home, a stranger who had saved her, yes, but a stranger nonetheless. As if sensing her thoughts, he spoke. I'm Daniel, by the way. Daniel Russo. Eliza Mercer, she replied. Thank you again for what you did back there. Most people would have just kept walking. Most people haven't been trained to do otherwise, he said cryptically. Eliza glanced at him curiously. Military? A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Former. Marine Corps. That explained the quick, efficient way he had handled the situation. Well, I'm grateful for your training tonight. They walked in companionable silence for a few moments before Daniel spoke again. Do you always walk home alone this late? The question could have sounded judgmental, but his tone was genuinely concerned. Usually, Eliza admitted. I work at the library, and we close at 9. It's never been a problem before. The world's changing, Daniel said quietly. Even in neighborhoods like this. They reached the entrance to Eliza's apartment building, and she turned to face him. Under the soft glow of the porch light, she noticed a darkening bruise along his jawline that hadn't been visible earlier. You're hurt, she said, reaching up instinctively before stopping herself. Daniel shrugged. It's nothing. I've had worse. Eliza bit her lip, feeling a sudden reluctance to end their encounter. Would you like to come up for some coffee? It's the least I can offer after what you did. He hesitated, and for a moment, Eliza feared she had overstepped. Then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. Coffee sounds great. As she led him up to her apartment, Eliza felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief at her narrow escape, gratitude for Daniel's intervention, and something else, an inexplicable sense that this chance encounter, born from danger, was the beginning of something significant. She couldn't have known then just how right she was. Hashtag Chapter 2, Coffee and Conversations. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked her apartment door, the events of the evening still reverberating through her body like aftershocks. She was acutely aware of Daniel standing behind her, a solid, reassuring presence that somehow made her feel both safer and more nervous at the same time. It's not much, she said as she pushed the door open, suddenly self-conscious about her modest one-bedroom apartment. But it's home. Daniel stepped inside after her, his gaze sweeping the space with what seemed like practiced efficiency before settling back on her. It's nice, he said, and sounded like he meant it. The apartment was small but thoughtfully arranged. Bookshelves lined one wall, overflowing with volumes arranged not by any discernible system, but by what appeared to be personal preference. A comfortable-looking couch faced a small television, and a writing desk was positioned near the window that overlooked the quiet street below. The kitchen was separated from the living area by a counter, and that's where Eliza headed, gesturing for Daniel to make himself comfortable. Please have a seat. How do you take your coffee? Black is fine, he replied, settling onto one of the stools at the counter rather than the couch. Eliza noticed that he positioned himself where he could see both the door and the window, and she wondered if that was a habit from his military days. As she busied herself with a coffee maker, Eliza found herself searching for something to say. The adrenaline from the attack was beginning to fade, leaving behind an odd mix of exhaustion and hyper-awareness. "I don't think I've seen you around the neighborhood before," she finally said, glancing over her shoulder at him. Daniel shook his head. "I don't live nearby. I was actually on my way to meet a friend when He trailed off, seemingly reluctant to reference the attack directly. "When you saved me," Eliza finished softly, turning to face him as the coffee began to brew. "Your friend must be wondering where you are." "I texted him while the police were talking to you," Daniel assured her. "Told him I'd have to reschedule." Eliza nodded, feeling a twinge of guilt. "I'm sorry about that. I hope it wasn't important." "Not as important as making sure you got home safely," he said simply. There was something about the way he spoke, direct, honest, without any trace of flirtation or ulterior motive, that made Eliza feel both comforted and intrigued. She brought 2 mugs of coffee to the counter and sat across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "So," she said after taking a sip, "Marine turned Good Samaritan. What do you do now?" Daniel's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Security consultant. I help businesses and individuals assess and improve their security measures." "That explains a lot," Eliza said, thinking of how quickly and efficiently he had handled her attacker. "You must be good at your job." "I try to be," he replied modestly. "What about you? You mentioned you work at the library?" Eliza nodded, grateful for the shift in conversation. "I'm the assistant director of the East Side Community Library. It's not exactly exciting work, but I love it." "Why is that?" Daniel asked, seeming genuinely interested. "I guess I've always found comfort in books," Eliza admitted. "They're like little worlds you can escape into whenever you need to. And I enjoy helping other people find those worlds, too." Daniel took a sip of his coffee, considering her words. "That's a nice way to think about it. I haven't read much since college, to be honest. Mostly just technical manuals and security protocols these days." "That sounds riveting," Eliza said with a small laugh. To her surprise, Daniel chuckled too, the sound warm and rich. About as riveting as watching paint dry, but necessary. A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Eliza found herself studying Daniel when he wasn't looking directly at her. The bruise on his jaw was darkening, and she noticed now that his knuckles were scraped raw. He had risked his safety for a complete stranger, and that fact alone made her curious about him. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Daniel nodded, his green eyes meeting hers steadily. "Of course. Why did you help me? I mean, most people would have called the police and kept their distance. You could have been seriously hurt." He considered the question carefully before answering. "I was trained to respond to threats, not to watch them unfold. When I saw what was happening..." He paused, his expression darkening slightly. "I couldn't just walk away." "Well, I'm grateful you didn't," Eliza said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if..." "Don't," Daniel interrupted gently. "Don't think about what could have happened. It didn't. You're safe." Eliza nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. The reality of the situation was finally hitting her in full force. "Sorry," she murmured, setting down her mug to wipe at her eyes. "I think it's just catching up with me." Daniel's expression softened. "It's okay. It's a normal reaction. The adrenaline's wearing off." "Is that what happened to you after?" She trailed off, not knowing how to ask about his military experiences without being invasive. "After combat?" he finished for her. "Sometimes. But we were trained to push through it." He paused, then added, "That's not always the healthiest approach, though." Eliza appreciated his honesty. "I suppose not," she agreed. "But training or not, what you did tonight was brave. Heroic, even." Daniel looked almost uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed to be done," he said, his voice quiet but firm. They fell into another silence, but this one felt weighted with unspoken questions and shared experience. Eliza found herself not wanting Daniel to leave, even as she knew it was getting late, and they were still strangers, connected only by a moment of violence and its aftermath. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel glanced at his watch and then drained the last of his coffee. "I should probably go," he said. "It's late, and you've had a rough night. You should get some rest." Eliza nodded, fighting back a sense of disappointment. "Of course. Thank you again for everything." They both stood, and Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Will you be okay? Is there someone you can call to stay with you tonight?" The concern in his voice touched her. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "I have a good security system, and I doubt lightning will strike twice in one night." Daniel didn't look entirely convinced. "Still, you might want to take a day or two off work. Give yourself time to process what happened." "I'll think about it," Eliza promised, knowing she probably wouldn't. The library was short-staffed as it was, and work would provide a welcome distraction. They walked to the door together, and an awkward moment ensued as they stood facing each other, neither quite sure how to say goodbye. "Will you be at the police station tomorrow?" Daniel asked suddenly. "When you give your statement?" Eliza nodded. "They asked me to come in around noon." "I'll be there too," he said. "Maybe we could grab lunch afterward?" "If you're feeling up to it," he added quickly. The offer surprised her, but Eliza found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "I'd like that." Daniel smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and softened his features. "Good. I'll see you tomorrow then." As she closed the door behind him and engaged the locks, Eliza leaned against the solid wood, her heart racing for reasons entirely different from fear. She had just made plans to see a man she barely knew, a man who had witnessed her at her most vulnerable, a man who had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. It was reckless, perhaps. Impulsive, certainly. But as Eliza pushed away from the door and headed to her bedroom, she couldn't deny the small flutter of anticipation in her chest. Tomorrow, she would see Daniel again. And somehow, that thought made the night's terrors recede, if only slightly. Hashtag Chapter 3. Statements and Lunch. The police station was busier than Eliza had expected for a weekday. She stood in the lobby, clutching her purse nervously as officers and civilians moved around her with purpose. The events of the previous night felt somehow distant now, as if they had happened to someone else or in a dream. But the bruise on her arm where her attacker had grabbed her was a vivid reminder that it had all been terrifyingly real. "Eliza." She turned at the sound of her name, and there was Daniel, looking more rested than he had the night before but still bearing the darkened bruise along his jawline. He was dressed in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, casual but put together. Eliza found herself absurdly glad that she had taken extra care with her own appearance that morning. "Daniel," she greeted him with a small smile. "How are you feeling?" "I should be asking you that," he replied, his green eyes studying her face with concern. "Did you sleep at all?" Eliza hesitated, then admitted, "Not much. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing it happen again." Daniel nodded, understanding in his expression. "That's normal. It'll get better with time." Before Eliza could respond, a detective approached them, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Ms. Mercer and Mr. Russo?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. "I'm Detective Harper. I'll be taking your statements today. If you'll follow me." They were led to separate rooms, and Eliza spent the next hour recounting the events of the previous night in painstaking detail. Detective Harper was thorough, asking her to describe the attacker, the knife, the exact sequence of events. By the time they finished, Eliza felt drained, the memories fresh and raw once again. "Your attacker has a record," Detective Harper informed her as they wrapped up. "Assault, robbery, drug possession. He's not talking much, but we have enough to hold him, especially with your testimony and Mr. Russo's." Eliza nodded, relieved. "So he'll stay in custody?" "For now," the detective confirmed. "The DA will likely press charges, and with 2 witnesses, we have a strong case. You should be prepared for the possibility of testifying if it goes to trial, though most of these cases end in plea deals." The thought of facing her attacker in court made Eliza's stomach turn, but she nodded again. "I understand. You're free to go," Detective Harper said, standing. We have your contact information if we need anything else. And Ms. Mercer, she added, her voice softening slightly. Consider talking to someone about what happened. The department can recommend victim support services if you're interested. Thank you, Eliza said, though she wasn't sure she would take the detective up on the offer. She preferred to process things on her own, through her books and her writing. Daniel was waiting for her in the lobby, his expression brightening when he saw her. All done, he asked. Finally, Eliza confirmed with a tired smile. You just finished a few minutes ago, he said. Still up for lunch? Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. I think I could use the distraction. They decided on a small cafe a few blocks from the police station, walking together in comfortable silence. The day was mild, the autumn sun casting a golden glow over the city streets. Under different circumstances, it would have been a perfect day for a stroll. The cafe was busy with the lunch crowd, but they managed to find a small table by the window. After ordering a sandwich and tea for Eliza, soup and coffee for Daniel, they settled into what felt like a strangely normal lunch for two people who had met under such extraordinary circumstances. So, Daniel said after they had exchanged pleasantries, how long have you worked at the library? Eliza welcomed the mundane question. About 5 years now. I started as a regular librarian and worked my way up to assistant director. Do you like it? I love it, she said, and meant it. Every day is different. I get to help people find exactly what they're looking for, whether it's a bestseller or information for a research project. And I get to organize community events, book clubs, children's readings. It's fulfilling. Daniel nodded, seeming genuinely interested. That's rare, finding work that you genuinely enjoy. What about you? Eliza asked. How did you go from the Marines to security consulting? It was a natural transition, Daniel explained as their food arrived. I specialized in security protocols and threat assessment in the Corps. When I got out, I worked for a private security firm for a while before starting my own consulting business. Your own business? Eliza raised her eyebrows, impressed. That must be challenging. It has its moments, Daniel admitted with a small smile. But I like the independence. And I'm good at what I do. I don't doubt that, Eliza said, thinking again of how quickly and efficiently he had neutralized her attacker. Do you work with a lot of individual clients, or mostly businesses? Mostly businesses, Daniel said. Corporations that need to protect sensitive information or facilities. But I do take on individual clients occasionally, especially if there's a specific threat. Eliza nodded, taking a bite of her sandwich to give herself a moment to think. There was something about Daniel that intrigued her, a quiet confidence, an air of capability that was both reassuring and slightly intimidating. Can I ask you something personal? She said finally. Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Go ahead. Do you ever, I don't know, miss the structure of military life? The clear purpose. It was a question that had been forming in her mind since their conversation the night before, and she wasn't sure why it felt important to ask it now. But Daniel didn't seem offended. Instead, he considered the question thoughtfully before answering. Sometimes, he admitted, there's a clarity to military life that's hard to find in civilian work. You know exactly what's expected of you, what your role is, what your purpose is. But there's also a rigidity to it that can be restrictive. Eliza nodded, understanding. And now you make your own rules. Within reason, Daniel said with a small smile. What about you? Have you always wanted to be a librarian? Eliza laughed softly. No, actually. I wanted to be a writer when I was younger. I studied English literature in college with dreams of publishing novels. What happened? Life, Eliza said simply. I needed a job that paid the bills, and the library was hiring. I fell in love with it, though. And I still write, just for myself now. What do you write? Daniel asked, seeming genuinely curious. Eliza felt a flutter of self-consciousness. Short stories, mostly. Nothing worth publishing. I doubt that, Daniel said with unexpected gentleness. You have a way with words, from what I've heard so far. The compliment caught her off guard, and Eliza felt a warmth spreading across her cheeks. Thank you, she said quietly. Maybe someday I'll let you read something. I'd like that, Daniel replied, and the sincerity in his voice made Eliza's heart skip a beat. They fell into an easy conversation after that, discussing books Daniel had read during his time in the service, Eliza's favorite authors, places they had both traveled to. It was surprisingly comfortable talking to this man who had been a stranger just a day before. By the time they finished their meal, Eliza felt as if she had known Daniel for much longer than the few hours they had actually spent in each other's company. As they prepared to leave the cafe, a sudden awkwardness fell between them. This was the logical end to their connection. The police statements were done. Lunch was over. There was no reason for them to see each other again. Yet Eliza found herself reluctant to say goodbye. Daniel seemed to share her hesitation. "Can I walk you home?" he asked as they stepped outside. "I'm actually heading to the library," Eliza told him. "I took the morning off for the police statement, but I'm scheduled to work this afternoon." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Daniel asked, concern evident in his voice. "After everything that happened, I think it's better if I stay busy," Eliza said firmly. "Besides, the library is safe. Well lit. Always people around." Daniel nodded, though he still looked worried. "At least let me walk you there." Eliza smiled. "I'd like that." The walk to the library took about 15 minutes, and they filled it with more conversation. Eliza found herself telling Daniel about her childhood in a small town upstate, how she had moved to the city for college and never left. In return, Daniel shared stories of growing up as a military brat, moving from base to base as his father was reassigned. "It must have been hard," Eliza said, "always being the new kid." "It taught me to adapt," Daniel replied with a shrug. "And to be self-sufficient. Useful skills, as it turned out." They reached the library too soon, its grand facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Eliza turned to face Daniel, suddenly uncertain. "Thank you for walking me," she said. "And for lunch. It was nice." "Normal. Normal is underrated," Daniel said with a small smile. Then, more seriously, "Will you be all right getting home tonight?" "I'll be fine," Eliza assured him. "One of my colleagues lives in my direction. We can walk together." Daniel nodded, seeming satisfied with that arrangement. "Good." They stood facing each other for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "I should let you get to work." "Right," Eliza agreed, though she made no move to leave. "Eliza," Daniel said suddenly, his voice low and serious. "I know we met under unusual circumstances, but I've enjoyed getting to know you. Would you want to have dinner sometime? A proper dinner, not just lunch after a police statement." The invitation sent a flutter of excitement through Eliza's chest. "I'd like that," she said, smiling. Daniel's expression lightened, relief evident in his eyes. "Great. How about Friday night?" "Friday sounds perfect," Eliza agreed. They exchanged phone numbers, and Daniel promised to text her the details for Friday. As Eliza watched him walk away, she felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, anticipation, and a lingering sense of disbelief at how quickly her life had changed in the span of a day. She was going on a date with the man who had saved her life. It sounded like something out of a romance novel, the kind she occasionally indulged in but would never admit to reading. Yet here she was living it. With a small, private smile, Eliza turned and entered the library, already looking forward to Friday. ## Chapter 4, Dinner and Discoveries. Friday arrived both too quickly and not quickly enough for Eliza's liking. The days following the attack had been a strange blur of normalcy punctuated by unexpected moments of fear, a sudden noise making her jump, a stranger walking too close on the street causing her heart to race. She had thrown herself into her work, finding comfort in the familiar routine of the library and the company of her colleagues. Daniel had texted her on Wednesday with details for their dinner, a small Italian restaurant downtown, nothing too fancy, but well-regarded. His messages had been brief but warm, checking in on her well-being in a way that felt protective but not overbearing. Eliza found herself looking forward to their conversations, however brief, and by Friday evening, she was almost nervous with anticipation. She stood in front of her closet now, trying to decide what to wear. The restaurant wasn't formal, but she wanted to look nice, nicer than Daniel had seen her so far. After much deliberation, she settled on a deep blue dress that she rarely had occasion to wear, paired with a light cardigan and modest heels. She wore her hair down, the auburn waves falling just past her shoulders, and applied a touch more makeup than usual. As she studied her reflection in the mirror, Eliza couldn't help but wonder what she was doing. It had been months since her last date, a forgettable dinner with a colleague of a friend that had led nowhere. And now here she was, preparing to have dinner with a man she had known for less than a week, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable. Yet there was something about Daniel that made her willing to take this chance. His quiet strength, his gentle concern, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words were worthy of his full attention, all of it drew her to him in a way she couldn't quite explain. The knock at her door came precisely at 7. Eliza took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and went to answer it. Daniel stood on the other side, looking more polished than she had seen him before. He wore dark slacks and a charcoal button-down shirt that brought out the green of his eyes. His hair was neatly combed, and the bruise on his jaw had faded to a pale yellow, barely noticeable now. "Hi," Eliza said, suddenly feeling shy. "Hi," Daniel replied, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look beautiful." The compliment was simple, direct, and delivered with such sincerity that Eliza felt a blush rising to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look nice, too." An awkward moment passed between them, the strangeness of their situation hanging in the air. Then Daniel smiled, a warm, genuine smile that eased the tension. "Ready to go?" "Just let me grab my purse," Eliza said, turning to retrieve it from the coffee table. They walked to the restaurant, the autumn evening pleasant enough that they didn't need to take a cab. Daniel kept a respectful distance between them, close enough to suggest companionship, but not so close as to be presumptuous. Eliza found herself appreciating his awareness of her space. The restaurant was, as Daniel had described, intimate without being overly romantic, with soft lighting and the rich aroma of Italian cooking filling the air. They were seated at a cozy table near the back, away from the main traffic of the dining room. After they had ordered linguine for Eliza, lasagna for Daniel, and a bottle of red wine to share, a comfortable silence fell between them. Eliza found herself studying Daniel openly, taking in the details she hadn't had time to notice before. The crinkles at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, the slight roughness of his hands, the way he seemed to be constantly aware of his surroundings without being obviously vigilant. "What?" Daniel asked, catching her stare. Eliza smiled, a little embarrassed at being caught. "I was just thinking how strange this is. A week ago, we didn't know each other. Now here we are, having dinner." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Life has a way of throwing unexpected things at us. Some more unexpected than others," Eliza said, thinking of the attack that had brought them together. "True," Daniel agreed. "But not all unexpected things are bad." The way he looked at her as he said it made Eliza's heart skip a beat. "No," she agreed softly. "Not all of them." Their wine arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Eliza told Daniel about a particularly challenging patron at the library who insisted on returning books with coffee stains, and Daniel shared a story about a security consultation gone wrong when the client's dog decided he was an intruder. By the time their food arrived, Eliza felt completely at ease. There was something about Daniel's presence that was both exciting and comforting, a combination she had rarely experienced before. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they began to eat. Daniel nodded, a forkful of lasagna halfway to his mouth. "Of course. Why did you ask me to dinner?" "Really?" The question had been nagging at her since he had extended the invitation. Was it just concern for her well-being? A sense of responsibility? Or something more? Daniel set down his fork, giving the question the consideration it deserved. "Because I wanted to get to know you better," he said finally. "Under different circumstances than how we met." Just like that, Eliza pressed. "You saw something worth knowing in a woman who was being attacked on the street." She hadn't meant for the question to sound so self-deprecating, but Daniel's expression softened at her words. "I saw someone who was scared but still trying to stand her ground," he said quietly. "Someone who offered coffee to a stranger who helped her, even though she was still shaking from fear. Someone who went back to work the next day because she didn't want to let what happened rule her life. He paused, his green eyes meeting hers. Yes, Eliza. I saw something worth knowing. The sincerity in his voice left Eliza momentarily speechless. She had expected a polite deflection or a casual compliment, not this level of observation and appreciation. Thank you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. That's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me. Daniel smiled, a touch of humor returning to his expression. I'm not always good with words, but I try to be honest. Honesty is underrated, Eliza said, returning his smile. The rest of the meal passed in easy conversation. They discovered shared interests in history and travel, debated the merits of different coffee shops in the city, and laughed over stories from their respective workplaces. By the time they finished their tiramisu and espresso, Eliza felt as if she had known Daniel for years rather than days. As they left the restaurant, the night air had cooled considerably. Eliza pulled her cardigan closer around her shoulders, and Daniel noticed the gesture. Cold, he asked. A little, she admitted. Without hesitation, Daniel shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost chivalrous. But, without hesitation, Daniel shrugged out of his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture was old-fashioned, almost chivalrous, but Eliza found herself touched by the simple act of kindness. His jacket was warm from his body heat and carried the subtle scent of his cologne, something woody and masculine that she found surprisingly appealing. Better? Daniel asked, his voice low in the quiet street. Much, Eliza replied, smiling up at him. Thank you. They walked in comfortable silence for a few moments, the city around them softened by the evening darkness. Street lamps created pools of golden light on the sidewalk, and the distant hum of traffic formed a soothing background noise. Would you like to take a walk? Daniel asked suddenly. There's a park nearby. It's well lit, he added quickly, clearly mindful of her recent experience. Eliza hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd like that. The park was indeed well lit, with lampposts lining the winding paths and several other couples and late-night joggers enjoying the space. They walked side by side, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed against each other, sending little sparks of awareness through Eliza's body. So, Daniel said after a comfortable silence, you know how I ended up in security consulting. But you never told me what happened to your writing dreams. Eliza sighed, surprised that he remembered that detail from their earlier conversation. Nothing dramatic. I graduated with my English degree, couldn't find a publishing job, and needed to pay the bills. The library was hiring, and it seemed like a good fit for someone who loved books. And the writing? Daniel prompted gently. I still write, Eliza admitted. Just not as much as I'd like. And not with any real purpose. It's more of a hobby now. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes hobbies are the things that keep us sane in the midst of real life. Is that what you have? Hobbies to keep you sane? A small smile tugged at the corner of Daniel's mouth. A few. I box at a gym downtown. Helps burn off excess energy. And I restore old motorcycles when I have the time. Motorcycles? Eliza raised her eyebrows, intrigued by this new information. I wouldn't have guessed that. No. Daniel looked amused. What would you have guessed? Eliza considered him for a moment. I don't know. Something practical. Woodworking, maybe. Daniel laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Eliza smile in response. Not too far off. My grandfather was a carpenter. He taught me a few things before he passed. But motorcycles, there's something about taking something broken and making it work again. Making it better than it was before. There was a depth to his words that suggested he was talking about more than just motorcycles, but Eliza didn't press. Instead, she asked, do you ride them too, or just fix them? I ride, Daniel confirmed. Nothing reckless, he added with a slight smile. Just it's a kind of freedom you can't get any other way. Eliza tried to picture Daniel on a motorcycle, his tall frame bent over the handlebars, the wind whipping past him. Somehow, the image fit. I've never been on one, she admitted. Maybe someday, Daniel said, his voice casual, but his eyes watching her reaction carefully. The implication that there would be a someday for them made Eliza's heart beat a little faster. Maybe, she agreed softly. They had reached a small pond in the center of the park, its surface reflecting the surrounding lights like scattered stars. Daniel led them to a bench overlooking the water, and they sat down, still wrapped in the comfortable silence that seemed to come naturally between them. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said after a moment. Daniel turned to face her, his expression open. "Of course. That night, when you helped me, you said you were on your way to meet a friend. Where were you going, exactly?" It was a question that had been nagging at her, though she wasn't sure why it mattered. Perhaps because it seemed like such an unlikely coincidence, Daniel being in the right place at the right time to intervene. Daniel didn't answer immediately, his brow furrowing slightly, as if considering how to respond. "I was meeting an old military buddy at a bar about 3 blocks from where I found you," he said finally. "I took a shortcut through that neighborhood because I was running late." "So, it was just chance?" Eliza asked, trying to keep the disbelief out of her voice. Daniel's expression softened. "I don't know if I'd call it chance," he said quietly. "But I wasn't following you, if that's what you're asking." Eliza flushed, embarrassed that he had so easily read her unspoken concern. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply." "It's okay," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's a fair question. We met under unusual circumstances, and you don't really know me yet." The yet hung between them, full of possibility. "I'd like to, though," Eliza said softly, meeting his gaze. "Know you better, I mean." Daniel smiled, his green eyes warming. "I'd like that too." Their conversation turned to lighter topics after that. Favorite movies, childhood memories, travel destinations they'd always wanted to visit. As they talked, Eliza found herself relaxing further, letting her guard down in a way she rarely did with someone she had known for such a short time. When they finally left the park, it was nearly midnight. Daniel insisted on walking her home, and Eliza didn't protest. They walked close together, their hands occasionally brushing, each touch sending a small thrill through Eliza's body. At her apartment door, they paused, the moment heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I had a really nice time tonight," Eliza said, shrugging out of Daniel's jacket and handing it back to him. "So did I," Daniel replied, his voice low. "Thank you for saying yes." Eliza smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for asking." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodnight. Finally, Daniel took a small step closer. "Eliza," he said softly, his eyes searching her face. "May I kiss you?" The question, asked with such simple directness, made Eliza's heart skip a beat. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as his lips met hers. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deepening as Eliza responded, her hands coming to rest on his chest. When they finally broke apart, Eliza felt slightly breathless, her pulse racing. Daniel's eyes were darker than before, his expression a mix of desire and something more tender. "Good night, Eliza," he said, his voice rough. "Good night, Daniel," she replied, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. As she closed the door behind her and leaned against it, Eliza couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. She had expected dinner and conversation, perhaps a friendly goodnight. She hadn't expected the connection she felt with Daniel, the way he made her feel both protected and desired. For the first time since the attack, Eliza went to bed without fear, her dreams filled not with the memory of violence, but with the gentle pressure of Daniel's lips on hers. Chapter 5: Shadows of the Past. The weeks following their first date passed in a blur of dinners, walks in the park, and long conversations that often stretched into the early hours of the morning. Eliza found herself falling into a rhythm with Daniel that felt both exciting and comfortable, as if they had known each other for years rather than weeks. On their third date, Daniel had taken her to a small jazz club downtown, where they sat in a cozy corner booth, sipping whiskey and listening to a talented quartet. As the saxophone player launched into a soulful solo, Daniel had reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a way that sent shivers up her arm. "What are you thinking?" he had asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear it over the music. Eliza had smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. "That I'm glad you were in the right place at the right time that night," she admitted. "As terrible as it was, I can't help but be grateful that it led me to you." Daniel's expression had softened, his green eyes warm in the dim light of the club. "I'm grateful too," he had said simply, squeezing her hand. Now, as Eliza sat at her desk in the library, sorting through book orders for the coming month, she found her mind wandering to Daniel instead of focusing on her work. They had been seeing each other for nearly a month, and tonight he was cooking dinner for her at his apartment, the first time she would see where he lived. "Earth to Eliza." A voice broke into her thoughts, accompanied by a gentle tap on her shoulder. Eliza looked up to find her colleague and friend, Maya, standing beside her desk with an amused expression. "Sorry," Eliza said, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking about your mysterious hero." Maya finished with a grin. "I swear, I've never seen you this distracted before. He must be something special." Eliza couldn't help but smile. "He is," she admitted. "Different from anyone I've dated before." "Different how?" Maya asked, perching on the edge of Eliza's desk. Eliza considered the question thoughtfully. "He's solid," she said finally. "Steady. I feel safe with him, but not in a boring way. More like he's a rock in a storm." "Sounds dreamy," Maya teased, but her eyes were kind. "When do we get to meet this paragon of manly virtue?" "Soon," Eliza promised. "We're still getting to know each other." In truth, Eliza had been hesitant to introduce Daniel to her friends, partly because she wanted to keep their budding relationship private for a while longer, and partly because she wasn't sure how they would react to the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Maya knew about the attack, of course. Eliza had needed to explain her sudden day off and the bruises on her arm, but she had downplayed Daniel's role in it, describing him simply as a good Samaritan who had helped her. "Well, don't keep him to yourself forever," Maya said, standing up. "Some of us are dying of curiosity." Eliza laughed. "I promise you'll meet him soon." As Maya walked away, Eliza turned back to her computer, trying to focus on the task at hand. But her thoughts kept drifting to Daniel, to the way he made her feel when they were together. Safe, yes, but also alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. By the time she left the library that evening, Eliza was practically vibrating with anticipation. She stopped by her apartment to change into a simple dress and touch up her makeup before heading to Daniel's place, following the directions he had texted her earlier. His apartment was in a converted warehouse on the edge of downtown, an industrial-looking building that had been renovated into loft spaces. Eliza took the elevator to the 5th floor, her heart beating a little faster as she approached his door. Daniel answered her knock almost immediately, as if he had been waiting nearby. He wore dark jeans and a soft-looking Henley, his feet bare on the hardwood floor. The casual domesticity of the scene made Eliza's heart skip a beat. "Hi," she said, suddenly shy. "Hi," Daniel replied, his smile warm as he stepped back to let her in. "Come in." The apartment was open and spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that let in the fading evening light. The decor was minimal but not sterile, comfortable-looking furniture, a few framed photographs on the walls, bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of volumes. It was tidy but lived in, and Eliza found herself relaxing as she took it all in. "This is nice," she said, turning to face Daniel. "It suits you." "Thanks," he replied, looking pleased. "Can I get you a drink? Wine, beer, something stronger?" "Wine would be great," Eliza said, following him to the kitchen area, which was separated from the living space by a large island counter. As Daniel poured the wine, Eliza noticed a delicious smell coming from the oven. "What are you making?" she asked. "Roast chicken with rosemary and lemon," Daniel replied, handing her a glass of red wine. "And roasted vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it's one of the few things I can make without burning down the kitchen." Eliza laughed. "It smells wonderful." They moved to the living area, settling on the couch as they sipped their wine. Daniel had put on some soft music, a jazz album Eliza recognized from their date at the club, and the atmosphere was relaxed and intimate. "How was your day?" Daniel asked, his arm resting on the back of the couch, not quite touching her, but close enough that Eliza could feel the warmth of his body. "Busy," she replied. "We're preparing for a big event next week, an author visit. It's a lot of coordination, but it's exciting too." Daniel nodded, his expression attentive. "Which author?" "Josephine Reeves," Eliza said. "She writes historical fiction set in the early 20th century. Her books are amazing, richly detailed, and emotionally complex." "I don't think I've read any of her work," Daniel admitted. "I have a few of her books, if you'd like to borrow one," Eliza offered. "Her writing style is immersive. You feel like you're really there, in whatever time period she's describing." "I'd like that," Daniel said, smiling. "It's been too long since I read a good novel." They fell into easy conversation after that, discussing books they had loved, movies they wanted to see, places they hoped to visit someday. It was comfortable, this back and forth between them, with none of the awkwardness that often accompanied new relationships. As they talked, Eliza found her gaze drawn to a framed photograph on the bookshelf. 3 young men in military uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. She recognized Daniel in the middle, looking younger and less guarded than she had ever seen him. Daniel followed her gaze and smiled, though there was a touch of sadness in his eyes. "That was taken just before our second deployment," he said quietly. "Me, Ryan, and Marcus. We were stationed together for most of our time in the Corps." Eliza noticed the past tense and felt a pang of sympathy. "Are you still in touch with them?" she asked carefully. Daniel was silent for a moment, his expression darkening slightly. "Ryan and I talk occasionally," he said finally. "He's in Colorado now, working as a wilderness guide." "Marcus?" "Marcus didn't make it back from our last tour." The simple statement held a wealth of emotion, and Eliza's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, reaching out to touch his arm. Daniel nodded, his jaw tightening briefly before he visibly relaxed. "It was a long time ago," he said, though Eliza could tell that the wound was still fresh in some ways. "But thank you." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken memories. Eliza sensed that Daniel was wrestling with whether to share more or change the subject, and she waited patiently, not wanting to push him. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice low. "We were on a routine patrol when our convoy was hit by an IED. Marcus was in the lead vehicle. He died instantly, that's what they told us anyway. Ryan was badly injured, lost part of his leg. I got away with just some shrapnel wounds and a concussion." Eliza could hear the survivor's guilt in his voice, the underlying question of why he had been spared when others hadn't. "That must have been terrible," she said, keeping her voice gentle. Daniel nodded, his eyes focused on something distant. "It was. But it's part of what led me to what I do now. After I got out, I realized I still needed to help people, to protect them. Security consulting seemed like a good fit." "And it is," Eliza affirmed. "You're good at it. You saved me." Daniel's expression softened as he looked at her. "I'm glad I was there that night," he said quietly. "Though I wish you hadn't needed saving in the first place." Eliza shifted closer to him on the couch, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Life is strange," she murmured. "Sometimes the worst things lead us to the best things." Daniel's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "That's a beautiful way to look at it," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They sat like that for a while, comfortable in each other's presence, until a timer went off in the kitchen. Daniel reluctantly pulled away, standing up. "Dinner's ready," he announced. The meal was delicious, the chicken perfectly cooked and seasoned, the vegetables caramelized and flavorful. They ate at the small dining table near the windows, watching as the city lights came on as darkness fell. "This is amazing," Eliza said after her first bite. "You've been holding out on me. You're a great cook." Daniel laughed, looking pleased. "Don't get too excited. My culinary repertoire is pretty limited. This is my signature dish." "Well, it's fantastic," Eliza assured him. "Thank you for cooking for me." "It's my pleasure," Daniel replied, his eyes warm as they met hers across the table. As they finished their meal and moved to the couch with fresh glasses of wine, Eliza felt a comfortable warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the alcohol. There was something about being here in Daniel's space that felt right, as if she belonged here, with him. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, his voice low as he settled beside her on the couch, closer than before. Eliza considered the question, then decided on honesty. "That I'm happy," she said simply. "Being here with you. It feels good." Daniel's smile was soft, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that made Eliza's heart flutter. "I'm happy too," he said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Happier than I've been in a long time." The admission, so simply stated, made Eliza's breath catch. She leaned into his touch, and Daniel's hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Eliza," he murmured, his voice rougher than before. "I'd like to kiss you again." "Yes," she whispered, already leaning toward him. Their lips met, gentle at first, then with increasing urgency. Daniel's hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head as he deepened the kiss. Eliza's hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Daniel rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "You're making it very hard for me to take things slow," he admitted, his voice low and husky. Eliza laughed softly, feeling a rush of feminine power at the effect she had on him. "Who says we need to take things slow?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Daniel pulled back slightly to look at her, his eyes searching her face. I don't want to rush this," he said seriously. "What's happening between us? It's important to me. I want to do it right." The sincerity in his voice touched Eliza deeply. In a world of casual hookups and non-committal relationships, Daniel's desire to do it right was refreshingly old-fashioned. "It's important to me too," she assured him, reaching up to touch his face. "And I appreciate that you want to take your time. But Daniel..." She hesitated, then decided to be brave. "I want you. And I think you want me too." Daniel's eyes darkened, his pupils dilating as he looked at her. "I do," he said, his voice rough. "God, Eliza, you have no idea how much." She smiled, feeling a thrill of anticipation. "Then show me," she whispered. For a moment, Daniel seemed to struggle with himself, desire warring with restraint. Then, with a low groan, he pulled her to him, capturing her lips in a kiss that was far more demanding than before. Eliza responded eagerly, her hands sliding up to his shoulders as she pressed herself closer to him. With a fluid movement that spoke of his physical strength, Daniel lifted her onto his lap, so that she was straddling him. Eliza gasped at the new position, which brought them into intimate contact. She could feel the evidence of his desire for her, and it sent a surge of heat through her body. "Is this okay?" Daniel asked, his hands on her hips, his voice strained. "More than okay," Eliza assured him, leaning down to kiss him again. They lost themselves in each other then, hands exploring, breaths mingling. When Daniel's lips trailed down her neck, Eliza tilted her head back, a soft moan escaping her lips. His hands were gentle but insistent, learning her body with careful attention. As the heat between them built, Daniel suddenly pulled back, his breathing ragged. "Eliza," he said, his voice rough. "If we don't stop now." Eliza met his gaze, her decision already made. "I don't want to stop," she said softly. Daniel searched her face, as if making sure she was certain. Then, with a sudden movement, he stood up, lifting her with him. Eliza wrapped her legs around his waist, laughing in surprise as he carried her across the apartment to the bedroom. Later, as they lay tangled together in Daniel's bed, the city lights filtering through the curtains, Eliza felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in a long time. Daniel's arm was draped over her waist, his breathing deep and even as he slept beside her. She studied his face in the dim light, the strong line of his jaw, now relaxed in sleep, the small scar above his eyebrow, the dark lashes resting against his cheeks. He looked younger like this, less guarded, and Eliza felt a surge of tenderness for him. She knew, with a certainty that should have been frightening this early in their relationship, that she was falling in love with Daniel Russo. And as she drifted off to sleep, wrapped in his warmth, she found that she wasn't afraid at all. Chapter 6: Deepening Bonds. The alarm clock beside Daniel's bed blinked 6 a.m. in harsh red digits, pulling Eliza from a deep sleep. She reached out automatically to silence it, then remembered where she was. This wasn't her bedroom, and the warm body beside her wasn't a dream. Daniel stirred, his arm tightening around her waist as he buried his face in her hair. "Sorry," he mumbled, his voice rough with sleep. "Forgot to turn it off." Eliza turned in his arms to face him, smiling at the sight of his tousled hair and sleepy eyes. "It's okay," she said softly. "I should probably get up anyway. I have work today." Daniel made a sound of protest, pulling her closer. "Colin's sick," he suggested, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. "Stay here with me." The temptation was strong, especially as Daniel's hand began to trace lazy patterns on her back. But Eliza had responsibilities, and she had already taken too much time off after the attack. "I wish I could," she said regretfully, "but I can't. We have that author visit today, remember?" Daniel sighed, then nodded. "Responsible Eliza," he murmured, but there was affection in his voice. "One of the things I like about you." Eliza caught the slip, her heart skipping a beat, but she didn't comment on it. Instead, she leaned in to kiss him softly, then reluctantly pulled away. "I should go home and change before work," she said, sitting up and reaching for her discarded clothes. Daniel propped himself up on one elbow, watching her with a mixture of admiration and regret. "At least let me make you breakfast before you go," he said. "Coffee at the very least." Eliza hesitated, then nodded with a smile. "Coffee would be great. Thank you." "It's not mine," Daniel admitted. "It's a company car. I usually take the subway or walk, but I thought it might be nice to drive tonight." Eliza nodded, curious about this glimpse into Daniel's professional life. "Your company must be doing well," she observed. Daniel shrugged, keeping his eyes on the road. "It's a specialized field. Not many people have the right background for it." "And you do?" Eliza said, not really a question. "I do," Daniel confirmed. "My military experience, plus some additional training I've had, it makes me valuable to certain clients." There was something in his tone that made Eliza wonder about the nature of his work. He had described it as security consulting, but she realized she knew very little about what that actually entailed. "What kind of clients do you work with?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Daniel glanced at her briefly before turning his attention back to the road. "Various types," he said vaguely. "Corporations, sometimes individuals. People who need protection or security assessments." Eliza nodded, sensing that he wasn't comfortable elaborating further. She decided not to press, at least not tonight. Instead, she changed the subject to the author event, describing Josephine Reeves' insights into the historical period she wrote about. They ended up at a small bistro that was still open late, sharing a plate of cheese and charcuterie and a bottle of wine as Eliza told Daniel about her day. As they talked, Eliza found herself watching him, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he leaned forward slightly when she was speaking, giving her his full attention. "What?" Daniel asked, catching her staring. Eliza smiled, feeling a surge of affection for him. "Nothing," she said softly. "I'm just happy to be here with you." Daniel's expression softened, and he reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm happy too," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Happier than I've been in a long time." The admission, simple as it was, made Eliza's heart swell. She squeezed his hand, feeling a connection between them that went beyond the physical attraction, beyond the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Later, as they walked back to Daniel's car, his arm around her shoulders to ward off the autumn chill, Eliza leaned into his warmth. "Would you like to come over?" she asked. "To my place, I mean. I don't have to work tomorrow." Daniel looked down at her, his eyes dark in the dim street lighting. "I'd like that," he said, his voice rough with desire. The drive to Eliza's apartment was charged with anticipation, a tension between them that was both exciting and comfortable. As they entered her building, Daniel's hand on the small of her back, Eliza felt a thrill of excitement mixed with a deeper sense of rightness. This time, when they came together, it was with a newfound familiarity, their bodies remembering each other from the night before. But there was also a depth to their connection that hadn't been there before, a tenderness that spoke of growing feelings. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in Eliza's bed, Daniel traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. Eliza hesitated, then decided on honesty. "That I'm falling for you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And that it should scare me, how fast this is happening, but it doesn't." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling on her skin. Then he shifted, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I'm falling for you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And it doesn't scare me either. It feels right." Eliza reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "It does," she agreed. "Like we were supposed to find each other." Daniel turned his head to press a kiss to her palm. "Maybe we were," he said simply. They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time since the attack, Eliza slept through the night without a single nightmare. The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Daniel and Eliza saw each other almost every day, alternating between their apartments, exploring the city together, or simply enjoying quiet evenings in. They discovered shared interests in history and art, spent hours in the city's museums, and found favorite spots in parks and cafes. While Daniel made coffee in the kitchen, Eliza used his bathroom to freshen up, wincing slightly at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was a tangled mess, and there was a small mark on her neck that she was pretty sure would require a strategically placed scarf today. When she emerged, Daniel was waiting with a steaming mug of coffee and a shy smile that made her heart flutter. He had pulled on a pair of sweatpants but remained shirtless, and Eliza found herself distracted by the defined muscles of his chest and the scattering of scars that told stories of his military service. "Stop looking at me like that, or you'll definitely be late for work," Daniel warned, handing her the coffee. Eliza laughed, accepting the mug gratefully. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "It's just you're very distracting." Daniel's smile widened, a hint of masculine pride in his expression. "So are you," he replied, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin tingle despite the fact that she was fully dressed. They drank their coffee together at the kitchen counter, talking quietly about their plans for the day. It felt surprisingly domestic, this morning routine, as if they had been doing it for years rather than for the first time. "Can I see you tonight?" Daniel asked as Eliza gathered her things to leave. "I could pick you up after work, maybe grab dinner?" "I'd like that," Eliza said, smiling. "But I might be late. The author event could run long, and I'll need to help with the cleanup." "I don't mind waiting," Daniel assured her. "Just text me when you're done, and I'll be there." Eliza felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Okay," she agreed. "I'll see you tonight then." Daniel walked her to the door, pulling her close for one last kiss before she left. "Have a good day," he murmured against her lips. "You too," Eliza replied, reluctantly stepping away. "And thank you for last night. It was perfect." Daniel's smile was soft, his green eyes warm. "It was," he agreed. "We'll have to do it again sometime." The promise in his voice sent a shiver of anticipation down Eliza's spine. "Definitely," she said, her voice slightly breathless. As she walked to the subway station, Eliza found herself smiling despite the early hour and the long day ahead. Something had shifted between her and Daniel last night, a deepening of their connection that went beyond the physical. She felt it in the way he had held her afterward, in the soft words they had exchanged in the darkness, in the comfortable silence of the morning. The workday passed in a blur of activity as Eliza threw herself into the preparations for the author event. She arranged chairs in the library's community room, set up a table for book signings, coordinated with the local bookstore that would be selling copies of Josephine Reeves' novels, and fielded last-minute questions from her colleagues. The event itself was a success, with a larger turnout than they had anticipated. Josephine Reeves was charming and articulate, her reading from her latest novel captivating the audience. During the Q&A session, Eliza found herself thinking about Daniel, wondering what he would think of the book, imagining introducing him to the author. It was nearly 9 o'clock by the time the last attendees left, and the cleanup was complete. Eliza texted Daniel, letting him know she was ready, and he replied immediately that he was on his way. As she waited outside the library, Eliza felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. It wasn't just the memory of the night before that excited her, but the simple fact that she was going to see Daniel again, hear his voice, feel his presence beside her. When he arrived, pulling up to the curb in a sleek black car that she hadn't seen before, Eliza felt a surge of affection at the sight of him. He got out of the car to greet her, pulling her into a brief but warm embrace. "Hi," he said, his voice low and intimate. "How was the event?" "It was great," Eliza replied, smiling up at him. "Packed house, lots of good questions." "Josephine was amazing." "I'm glad," Daniel said, opening the passenger door for her. "You look beautiful, by the way." Eliza glanced down at her simple work outfit, a pencil skirt and blouse that she had worn countless times before, and felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "You don't look so bad yourself." Daniel smiled, closing the door after she was settled and walking around to the driver's side. As he got in, Eliza admired the car's interior, which was as sleek and elegant as the exterior. "Nice car," she commented as Daniel started the engine. "I didn't know you had this."